inspiring you to build the life of your dreams by teaching you how to create a career you love. This is the Job Lab Podcast with your host, Nick Murphy.
Hey there, my friend, and welcome to episode 3 of the Job Lab Podcast. My name is Nick Murphy, and hey, thank you for being here and spending some time with me today. I'm really grateful and honored that you've chosen to do that. I know there are no shortage of things out there in the universe clamoring for your undivided attention. So whether you give me 3 minutes, 40, I really appreciate you being here and taking the time. If you're coming back to us again, thank you twice. And if you're a new listener, I'm really happy that you're here. So now that you are here, please do subscribe to the show and make sure you never miss an episode. Our guests, our format is different in this space. This podcast is something that is unique, and we're really excited about the content and upcoming guests and future episodes as well. So if you like what you're hearing, the best thing you can do for me is leave us a 5-star rating and leave us a positive review out there on iTunes. And the most positive thing you can do for yourself and your network is share the show. Make sure that everyone that you know that could benefit from what you're listening to gets a glimpse of what we're doing and can check it out for themselves. If you missed last week, I invite you to go back and check it out. I chatted with John Stout, a talent acquisition leader, a groovy talent acquisition leader at that. And we talked about how HR leaders view the world and what we as working professionals can do to engage with them, both when we're seeking to move jobs and also how best to move around the organization and even get promoted. And today's guest is an absolute rock star at her craft, which happens to be negotiating with confidence. Melissa Hereford has more than 22 years experience teaching people how to become better negotiators. She's led trainings at huge international companies to train their teams, as well as worked one-on-one and in a group setting as a coach. So she really gets it. She's seen it from every angle, and I know you'll learn something today. In my conversation with Melissa, I asked her all about how to uncover and identify new opportunities to negotiate at work. Because I got to be honest, I always thought negotiation was salary negotiation. And so once I was in a role, well, that ship has sailed, my friend, but that's not the case whatsoever. So we chat about that. And then I asked her, why is negotiation such a scary word? And why are we so afraid to just ask for what we want? How do we get better at that ask? And why should you care about becoming a better negotiator? At the end of the episode, she's created a special gift just for you, my listeners, and you definitely don't want to miss that. So without further ado, let's get right into my conversation with Melissa Hereford. Welcome, my friend, to episode 3 of the Job Lab Podcast. We are joined today by Melissa Hereford, and Melissa's been teaching people how to negotiate for more than 22 years. Through her workshop, Negotiate with Confidence, she teaches skills to get ahead and get along, and teaches you how to confidently ask for what you want without worrying that you're going to be called bossy or too aggressive. Melissa, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, Nick. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Just take a quick second and fill in any gaps from that bio, and then give us a little insight into your personal life, and we'll get rocking about negotiation.
Yeah, well, I started working in negotiation training about 23 years ago. I lucked out. I got hired by a company that teaches people how to negotiate in Fortune 1000 companies. So I really spent my entire career working with people in corporate environments. I have a deep understanding of what it's like to work within a bunch of different industries because our clients ranged from pharmaceuticals to building equipment to high tech and just about everything in between, which is a lot of fun. It gave me insights into what people struggle with the most in their day-to-day negotiations, as well as the human components of negotiation and how we deal with rejection and whether or not we ask again, how we get back on that bicycle and keep going, even when we get a no. So it's been a passion of mine. Negotiation really encompasses so much of our human experience, how we interact with one another, how we talk to one another. It's really about the day-to-day components of our conversations, how we can use our words to be more effective or less effective if we don't really practice and get good at the things that are important.
So negotiation is one of those words that freaks a lot of people out. So how do we get more comfortable with what it actually is and get better at doing it ourselves?
So yes, negotiation is one of those things that people dread. I think it's in the top 10 for sure of things that people hate to do. And the question is why? Why do we hate to negotiate? And after working with hundreds, if not thousands of business professionals over all these years, I've really narrowed it down to one thing, and that's our fear of rejection, our fear of getting a no. Then when you dig a little deeper and start to ask, why is it that we're so afraid of getting a no? Our business lives and our personal lives are so intertwined these days, and we really identify with who we are through the lens of our professional personality. what we do defines us so much as a human. So when we ask for something that's important and somebody says no, oftentimes we just take it too personally. And this is especially true when you're looking for a job. It's true in your everyday negotiations, but when you're looking for a job, so much of negotiating when it comes to salary, if they say no to what I want as a salary, that reflects on me as a human. That is really hard to take and hard to get over. And you have to practice and learn skills to get over that rejection and to not take it personally.
So how do we make it less scary? Is it really just a matter of asking so many times, being told no so much that you just frankly get over it and you don't care what the answer is? Or is there another way to get really good at negotiation or practice making that ask that doesn't just set you up to be rejected over and over?
Yes, that's a great question. And there are a number of skills that you can learn to use. It really comes down to starting with creating a script and then practicing that script 100 times until you get comfortable saying it. That's the first step. Practice saying it in front of the mirror, practice saying it to your friends, practice saying it to your mom, to your significant other, until those words really do, making the ask really do start to roll off of your tongue more effectively. So you can say it without getting nervous or being afraid. And then practicing in the low stakes environment. In your everyday negotiations, when you're asking people for a different deadline, when you're asking people to be a part of a project team, when you're scoping a new project, in those low stakes negotiations, if you just practice and get used to asking for more of what you want, then when you do the big negotiations, the ones that feel like you're more emotionally triggered during those negotiations, they just come so much more easily because you've changed your habits. And you've gotten used to making the ask and responding in a way that isn't so personally triggering.
So in a work environment, I've worked with people like this, and I think it's, in a way, it's part of our society and part of our conditioning that when someone asks you to do something at work, it's not really an agreement. It's not an ask. It's, I expect you to do this and you work for me, so you go do it. How can we introduce negotiation for little things into our work life in order to make sure that we're getting what we want, or that we're, if nothing else, you're setting boundaries and at maximum, maybe you're building credibility inside the organization. How do we do that? And where are the best opportunities to do that in a normal work day?
Yeah. So curiosity is your number one skill. I spent my career working with salespeople and helping them negotiate with their clients and teaching salespeople how to negotiate with their clients. And salespeople are really good at, for example, using the words that you just used, I expect this by this deadline. And if I just responded to every single salesperson who asked me for something without getting curious about why do you need it? Tell me what else is going on. Where does that deadline come from? I would have spent every moment of every day responding to requests. And that's not an effective way to live. For one thing, you end up working 80 hours a week when you may really not need to. When I used curiosity and when I advise other people to use curiosity, it sounds more like this. You come to me and say, hey, Melissa, can you get me this client report by the end of the day? And what you're really saying is, I expect you to do that. Now, most people respond to that. You're an authority figure and you're asking me to do something for you. Maybe you're my boss. Maybe you're not my boss. But if my immediate response is, yes, sir. Okay, Nick, I will get that to you by the end of the day. There is no room for negotiation. I'm just responding and saying yes. And your job will very quickly spiral out of control and you'll be working way more hours than you want. But if I take a moment and ask you a question, hey, Nick, I'm curious. Why do you need this by the end of the day? And I use the words I'm curious because then I come across as genuinely curious as opposed to being defensive. You may say, and this is what probably 80% of the time the salespeople that I work with would say, I don't know, I just need it. And I thought the end of the day sounded like enough time.
Super scientific deadline.
Not exaggerating when I say that. Like, people really do make up deadlines, or maybe they don't make up a deadline. Maybe they really do need it by the end of the day, but you want to find out whether or not that's true. Oftentimes I would hear things like, well, I'm going on a client trip. I'm going to see a client. I'm going to be flying all day tomorrow and I want to read it while I'm on the plane. Oh, okay. So you're not leaving until tomorrow. What time does your flight leave? Will you be checking your email while you're on the flight? And once you start asking those kinds of questions, well, maybe you don't need to do it by the end of the day. Maybe you can get it by noon tomorrow. Are you going to be reading the whole presentation, or are there just highlights that would be the most helpful to you? But most people respond to someone who is in a higher authority position than they are by just saying yes.
I get asked a lot about millennials and how do you handle millennials better? And it's interesting in listening to you talk about this. It seems like one of the knocks on millennials from a lot of higher ups inside organizations is that they're always asking questions, like just shut up and do it. And I've always kind of had their back. I'm a couple years too old to be a millennial, but they're just curious. They're just trying to have a full understanding of the scope. And so are millennials just better natural negotiators?
I think they are. And part of that comes from, well, I don't know if they're better negotiators. I haven't seen any data on that, but I think they are more genuinely curious. And if that is what you see happening in the workplace, then bravo, I say. Now, why is it that people get annoyed when you're asking questions? And I think part of that has to do with the fact that we're all so busy. And when you look at our society in general, curiosity in general is down. We're not asking questions around the tough things, like, why do you believe the things that you believe? And we go straight into defensive mode because we're so pressed for time. We're reading more. We're being bombarded with messages constantly from people trying to sell us things. We're trying to keep up with Facebook and Instagram, all our social media. And when we get crunched for time, we become less patient and maybe are less willing to answer those questions.
It's ironic, isn't it, that we're crunched for time and we're asking less questions at a point in the human experience, if you will, or evolution that gives us as much information at our fingertips as any person has ever been able to access in their life. It seems counterintuitive in a lot of ways to become less curious instead of taking advantage of all of that incredible information that's just so easy to access.
It really is, but we have to manage our brain's ability to take information in. And we do that by segmenting and by choosing, well, I'm not going to read the New York Times today because I don't have time, and choosing what we're going to focus on. And I'd say if you're going to choose what to focus on, choose those personal interactions and those conversations that you're having live with other people over social media, because that kind of curiosity is going to get you further in your personal connections, your authentic connections that you have with the people that you work with. And those kinds of connections will help you get ahead in every part of your career and your life.
I've never heard negotiation reframed as curiosity, but for me, just listening to you hear it for the first time, it's disarming. It makes it seem more accessible. It makes it seem like something that we can all do. You just let your inner child come out, right? Like my kids ask 40,000 why questions, or can I, like, just stop asking questions. But it's super disarming to think about it as curiosity, but to play devil's advocate for the listener out there who now is bought in and says, okay, I get that. I'm going to ask more questions. I'm going to be more curious because it's going to benefit me. But my boss is just a complete pain in the rear. Like there's no way that they're going to go for this. What are the best situations to kind of keep an eye out for to dip your toe in the water with this tactic and get a little practice negotiating with a boss that is prone to just say, because I said so?
So you might try, first of all, use a softener. I'm curious, just to prime the pump and let them know that you're going to ask a question. And then if you know that this person is impatient and tends to not want to answer questions, tell them how many questions you're going to ask. I'd like to ask you 2 questions. Is that okay? And there may be a percentage of the time where they're going to say no. Most people, especially if they know that there's an end to the number of questions that you're going to ask them. When I think about little kids and them asking you a million questions, that is annoying. So to deal with a tough boss in a situation like that, I'd probably say, hey, I have a couple of questions about this project. Can I ask you these 2 questions?
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. So you've worked with a lot of salespeople. You've worked with a lot of people teaching them how to negotiate. Flip that around. And what advice would you give for someone who's listening that might be in a leadership position? How can they encourage their team to negotiate? And is that something that leadership would want them to learn how to do? Do they feel like they're going to be taken advantage of if they create a bunch of great negotiators inside their organization among their direct reports?
Well, there's no doubt that managers feel like a deer in the headlight when somebody comes in and says, I'd like to talk to you about my career, or I'd like to talk to you about my salary. That managers need to be prepared for that, though, because the number one advice that I'm giving to people is to negotiate. And if you're, as a manager, and I've been in the management position as well many times in my career, that part of your job as a manager is to manage your people and to advise them on their career and point them in the right direction. And there's a saying, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it's something like, it's kind of like the you can teach a man to fish or give him a fish. If you have employees on your team that you're just giving them fish every day, you're essentially saying, do these 5 things. You're more like a dictator, and the people who work on your team are not going to be satisfied for very long if they're ambitious. And you want people who are high performers. You want people who are curious, because it may take a little more time and effort on your part to actually manage people like that. But those are the people who are going to come up with solutions that you've never thought of. And you don't want to be the dictator who's saying, look, do it my way or the highway, because all creative options that other people on your team are bringing into your workplace, their diverse background, where they went to school, how they were raised, all of the things that make them interesting people and the reason you hired them, curiosity and a drive to have those kinds of conversations. Those are the people that are going to come up with the innovative ideas, the creative ideas, and the ideas that are going to help you succeed as a boss, as a manager, as a department in every single project that you work on.
So for the listener that's out there that they feel curious, but maybe they have, whether it's insecurity, whether they're just more quiet, whether it's just not their style to ruffle feathers or to ask for things. What other skills, what other tips would you give that person to kind of get out of their comfort zone and make those asks?
Look for areas where you might be making assumptions. I talk to people all the time about assumptions, and assumptions are kind of the killer of all creativity. So let's just take the simplest situation where you're walking down the hall and you pass a coworker and you say hi and they don't say hi back to you. And your first assumption is like, oh, they're mad at me, or they don't like me, or it's something negative about me. And I always jump to that assumption, and people in general always jump to that assumption that I did something wrong, that there's something wrong here that I'm on the other end of. So challenge yourself, first of all, am I making an assumption about the situation? And let's go back to our example where we're talking about somebody who says that they have a deadline, and you're making the assumption that that deadline is real. So first of all, challenge your own assumptions. And then even if you're uncomfortable asking questions, just push yourself a little bit harder to be curious and ask questions, because you're making a choice right now in your life. Am I going to be the kind of person, even introverts can be really good at asking questions. Am I going to be the kind of person who just accepts whatever is given to me? Or am I going to be the kind of person who can move myself forward? And as far as we know, we only have one shot on this planet. So asking yourself those important questions and then saying, what is one little area where I can challenge myself to not make an assumption and ask a question in this moment? Even these tiny little baby steps forward, you will find will start to open up the world for you in a different way, in a way that you didn't think was possible before. Because you don't want to go through your life just accepting whatever some boss is in the mood to give you today. You want to take control of your destiny, even if it's in little ways that will help you to keep your workload to a more manageable level, to start setting boundaries, to not be walked over, to be the kind of person who can move your life forward proactively.
So Melissa is dropping a lot of value here around the benefits of negotiation. Right after this break, I'm going to ask her specifically, what are the biggest benefits to people that become great negotiators? And we're also going to play a little rapid fire right after this.
The Job Lab is brought to you by Mid-America Careers, the Midwest Career Network. Quickly search millions of jobs with a single click. Create alerts so you're the first to know when a great new job is posted. Research exciting new career opportunities, and more. No matter where you are in your professional journey, Mid-America Careers can help. Visit midamericacareers.com to claim your free account today.
Welcome back to the Job Lab. We are talking with Melissa Hereford, a negotiation expert. And Melissa, if I'm really uncomfortable with negotiation, if I just either don't want to be rejected or I'm timid by nature and I'm curious, but I'm just uncomfortable. I really want to push myself to do this. What's in it for me? What are the most common benefits that come from being good at negotiating at work?
So that's a great question, Nick. And I would say people generally are not excited to give you things. Like your manager, their job is to keep you happy and keep you employed at the lowest possible price. So if you're not asking for a salary increase, if you're not asking for expanded responsibilities or promotion, the magic fairy may visit you and you may luck out and be just given that promotion. But most of the time, people are not advancing and not making more money because they're not asking. And in fact, the studies show that this is true. 59% of people do not negotiate their salary. And it does break down also by gender. 54% of men are not asking and 68% of women are not asking. But the good news is that those who ask are also 54% more likely to get it. So just the fact that you ask, you are more likely to get it. And I hope that that's really inspiring for people. If you can figure out, and you can get a script for how to ask on my website, get a script, write down what you're going to say, practice saying it 100 times, and you're 54% more likely to get it. I hope that that's really inspiring for people to take a risk, take a chance, and ask for what you want. Now start off with something small. It may not be even your salary. Start off with something small. Start asking for what you want when you go to a restaurant. If you don't like your food, ask them to replace it. Just little things that you can ask for. And in fact, there's a great TED Talk that I'd love to share in the show notes called 100 Days of Rejection by a guy. He wrote a book about it, and he did this TED Talk about how he pushed himself to ask for something every single day for 100 days in a row, and how that desensitized him to the idea of being rejected and getting a no. And he really pushed himself. There were little things that he started with all the way up to the big things that getting used to that kind of rejection will help desensitize you to it. But you're also really significantly more likely to get it when you do ask for it.
No, that's great advice. I had never heard that stat before, but you're more than 50-50 likely to get it just by asking. So, what's the worst that can happen, right? They say no and you're in the exact situation that you're in today.
Exactly.
Another thing I've heard is one of our guests actually makes his clients do this exercise, and he says, you need to go, whatever product or service you're selling, whatever it is you have to offer. And this is, for entrepreneurs specifically, go and create some ridiculous price in your mind. Like, I'm going to sell you job advertising for 1 year and it's going to be $1 million. And just go ask some perfect client just so that they can tell you no. But it's similar to that same idea that you get the rejection out of the way and you create this price that's pie in the sky, and, they say no and you realize that nothing happened. Like, your life didn't end. Your business didn't go under. I'm still here and I asked, and oh my God, maybe next time they'll say yes. And you kind of go from there.
Yeah. There's another exercise that Tim Ferriss shares in a TED Talk that he did, where he learns to look at his fears. And he does this exercise where he writes down what his fear is. And then he says, what's the absolute worst thing that can happen? And then he lists out all the worst things that could possibly happen. And then actually goes through and says, okay, if that happens, what will I do? And if this happens, what will I do? And that act of saying, I got this. It's like, I have seen what I'm going to ask for and all the horrible things that could potentially happen and what I'm going to do if they do happen. Imagine the amount of confidence you're going to get, because no matter what happens, you're good. Like, you got some answer or some way to respond to that. It just puts the power back in your ball court. Essentially, it puts the power back with you, where you don't feel like you are just going to be the victim of whatever happens in life, that I actually have an answer for this and I have a way to respond to this.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It almost makes you wonder, like, how we got to this point where we didn't have any power in the first place. And it was probably by not asking for enough things and saying, okay, one too many times. And suddenly you wake up and go, man, I'm not doing anything I want to be doing. And I feel like, for listeners out there that are feeling that way, take Melissa's advice to heart, download that script. We're definitely going to put that in the show notes. And moving into what I consider my favorite segment, I love the Q&A. I love hearing and learning from you, but I love rapid fire. So are you ready to play the rapid fire round, Melissa?
I'm ready, Nick. Let's go.
All right, here we go. What do you think about when you're alone in your car?
Oh gosh, now I got to be fast. Okay, what do I think about when I'm alone in my car? I actually listen to podcasts, so I don't think unless I'm listening to something that's prompting me to think. Like, I'm not a ponderer. I don't like go back over my life and think I should have done this or how would I respond to that. I'm always listening to something. And so I'm thinking about whatever's on, whatever audio is on in my car.
What's your advice for your previous boss?
Oh, curiosity. How about asking some questions?
What do you want to be when you grow up?
I hope I never grow up.
I love that. What inspires you?
The entrepreneurs and men and women who are speaking up for gender equality and more honest, authentic conversations in the workplace.
What is your biggest fear?
Oh God, I have this horrible fear of failure. I have to push myself every single day to do things that scare me.
Who do you admire the most?
Oh my God, who do I admire the most? You know, I really want to say someone political, but I'm afraid that I would just make half of your listeners mad. But I really do admire Hillary Clinton for what she did in the last election. So politics be damned. I'm going to say it.
Which celebrity annoys you the most?
Chris Rock.
And last one, you get to share a drink or a meal with anyone in history, dead or alive. Who is it and why?
Michelle Obama. Why? Michelle Obama was such a role model to women and girls, I think especially millennials in this country. The way she was so poised and articulate in every single speech that I heard her make was so inspiring. She is definitely my choice.
That is awesome. Thank you so much for being a good sport and playing rapid fire with me. And then one last quick thing before we go, just your number one parting piece of advice for anyone that's feeling overwhelmed or unsure. And then how do we follow you and get more engaged with your content?
Yeah, so it is totally normal and natural to feel overwhelmed and unsure when you are negotiating. It's something that is extremely counterintuitive to us for all the reasons that we've talked about, that fear of failure, taking things personally. All of those things are just normal and natural, but they have also become over time habits for us. And so if you start by just thinking, my response in this situation is a habit and it's a habit that I can change, then you are one step closer to actually making a change. So instead of beating yourself up and saying, God, I'm not good at this. I don't negotiate well. Say, I don't negotiate well because I haven't formed the habits that I need to negotiate well. And then break it down one step at a time. Go to my website, which is melissahereford.com. I'm sure you'll have this link in the show notes, and download a script and then write out your first script and just practice it. And you will slowly over time, by taking things one thing at a time, start to change your habits and become the person that you want to be.
It's amazing. I think scripts are an amazing download and something that's super valuable. And it's, when you think about it, like I don't have a script per se, but there's a script or a bullet point list or a format for this show and for things that we do seriously that need to be well structured and well thought out. Always have a list or a bullet or a script, something like that. So we'll definitely put that in the show notes. And Melissa, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for sharing your experience with us.
Thanks, Nick. It was a pleasure.
And there you have it, my friend. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Melissa Hereford. Don't forget to grab her free script by heading over to thejoblab.com/E3 download. On episode 4, I'm going to chat with a seasoned career expert and executive coach about the most common mistakes we all make in our job search and how to avoid them. So if you or somebody you know is actively looking for a new role or you're thinking about embarking on a new job search yourself, you won't want to miss it. As a reminder, please email me your questions and your feedback. What's that one question that you want answered? Let me know what it is, and I might just build an entire episode around helping you solve it, because let me let you in on a tiny little secret. You aren't the only one feeling this way. So your questions are going to help yourself. We're going to solve them for you, and together we're going to create a great conversation out there for other people that are going through the same thing. If you haven't yet, please subscribe to the show and make sure you never miss an episode. The guests coming up are absolutely freaking awesome, and I'm just getting started. I'm telling you, like, in the next couple of weeks, we're going to visit with best-selling authors, world-renowned experts in their fields, and even a 2-time Super Bowl champion. So subscribe now if you haven't. There's no reason to wait and risk missing one of those episodes. And if you like what you're hearing, please give the Job Lab podcast a 5-star rating and leave a review for us on iTunes. And just to reiterate what Melissa said, practice, practice, practice. You can leverage Melissa's free negotiation script to help you And you can find that link in the show notes and online, along with transcriptions and videos of the podcast. Everything's available on the website at thejoblab.com. Melissa absolutely crushed the tactical parts of negotiation. But I want to remind you that it all starts in our heads. You have to, with every fiber of your being, believe that you deserve it. Whatever your ask is, you're not being greedy, you're not being shallow, you're not being annoying or petty or disruptive. Remember that. Convince yourself of that and learn the skills Melissa shared today. Because combining those two things will all but guarantee that you will get what you're looking for in your negotiations. Never settle. Thanks for being here, and I'll be back with you next week.
You've been listening to The Job Lab with your host, Nick Murphy. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe on iTunes or Google Play today.